Hello viewers, this is your host Dhiren Mehta from the Global Perspectives. As we all know, the mainstream media today is controlled by large corporates and lobbyists serving to special interest groups. And because of that, most of the coverage in mainstream media is serving to specific narrative built on a selective and twisted facts and biased stories. We are a new age crowdsourced reporting medium that aims to bring alternate perspectives on the issue of global relevance that too need to be heard. We are committed to make honest efforts to bring to you the perspectives of the opinion makers whose perspectives are often not well presented in mainstream media.
Where we are going to talk about the global implication of the upcoming US election, essentially the outcome of US election. We have two competing parties here, Democratic Party represented by Biden Harris, and obviously the Republican Party with the current President Trump on the ticket and with Vance. So to talk about that, we are going to talk mainly about the global implication and somewhat about implication in US as well. But since we have the panelists from Globe, we'll talk mainly about the implication in terms of what it would entail across the world, because US election and the US president is very, very influential across the world. To talk about that, today we have on the panel, going by alphabetical order, Arif Aajakia. Arif is a human rights defender. He has been active defending human rights for last 27 years. Spent a lot of time in Geneva in the UNHRC office. He is the ex-mayor of a town in Karachi, but currently living in exile in UK because of his views. He had a threat to his life in Pakistan. We have David Vance. David is very, very active in social media. He is a founder of Alt News Media. He wears the badge of pride that very often, Twitter doesn't find his views very convenient and kicks him out. And I think it is a matter of pride today if you are kicked out by Twitter. And he's very vocal about his views. He believes in freedom of expression, and that's, I think, something that we should all cherish. We have Francios Gautier, who is a historian, journalist. He's a French national living in India for last almost 40 years. He is historian. He has written several books. He has written extensively about the history of both the India as well as European history. He has covered extensively the Indian subcontinent as a journalist as well as a historian. And we have Purnima Nath. She is a social activist. She is championing the cause and bringing many Hindu voters in US for supporting Trump, and we would like to know why in our program. She in fact ran for a county election recently in Milwaukee. She's based out of Milwaukee in Wisconsin. She's by profession engineer turned into management consultant. So welcome to the program panelist, and it's my privilege to have you all in the program. Thank you so much. So let's get started. And first of all, since we're talking about the global implication of the outcome of US election, we'll go ahead with 2 minutes opening speech by each of you. What are your views of both Trump and Biden in terms of what that could mean globally? So starting in alphabetical order again, Arif, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you very much, Mehta ji. Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Dasara to everyone. It's a religious festival, but it is more cultural festival which everybody enjoys.
Thank you so much. And by the way, for everybody's benefit, Dasera signifies a victory of righteousness over evil, victory of dharma over adharma. So happy Dasera to all of you.
Thank you, Mehtaji. Well, we will talk about these US elections implications on global perspective, about China, about Middle East policy. But here I would go as a Muslim that it is very important for Muslims like me who are in millions and we don't believe on extremism. And President Trump, since the beginning of his term, he pointed out that we paid $33 billion to Pakistan to fight extremism, but Pakistan is patronizing terrorism. So he knows the root cause of the problem. And for Muslims, like our President Macron in France, he has clearly pointed out and targeted that we should call it Islamist terrorism. Nobody else has as yet has called it Islamist terrorism, which is Islamist terrorism. It is based on religious ideology. And Pakistan is patronizing all these Islamic extremists. So President Trump is good for Pakistan also, because if Pakistan wants to survive as a country, it has to come out of this religious extremism and terror. And unless and until Pakistan does come out Islamic extremism and terrorism, Pakistan will dismember soon, because terrorism has no place in international politics anymore. For Pakistan, it has been a cornerstone of their foreign policy. But I think that now Pakistan has to realize that the world has come out strongly against terrorism. And if President Trump wins, I'm sure that Muslims like me, who are Muslim, but who are not extremists, who believe on coexistence, it is good that President Trump becomes president for 4 more years, and we get a strong hand with European Union and liberal world against these Islamic terrorists.
Thank you, Arif. David, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is a fundamental moment because I consider the struggle between Trump and Biden the equivalent of the struggle between righteousness and pretty much evil. That's how I see it. I think this is fundamental to the future of the United States, and it's obviously fundamental to the future of the world. But you know, I don't want to be sound as if I'm over exaggerating, but for me, it is that simple. And we'll talk about why that is as we go through the program. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, countries like China, Pakistan, they're all rooting for Slow Joe. So in those rare moments when he's still conscious, they want this guy in the White House, and that's because they want Trump out of the White House. 4 years ago, I advocated for President Trump. He won. 4 years on, it's like history's repeating itself. You know, he's behind in the polls. It's going to be a shoe-in for the Democrats. I don't believe that. 4 years ago, the media lied. The media can't be trusted. And 4 years on, we still can't trust them. They're even worse. Big tech, you mentioned Twitter, Dhiren, Twitter, which takes people like me off, but allows some of the vilest people on this planet to exist on its platform. You know, this is the struggle we face. It's a struggle between right and wrong, between good and evil, and I stand 100% with President Trump.
Francios, would you like to go ahead?
It's a bit of paradox for me because I'm not very fond of Trump, the man. I find him often tactless. You know, he, like recently, you know, he speaks badly about India, though he's a friend of India. I'm not of the man, actually. I mean, without knowing him, I would vote against him. But he's on the right side. If he loses, then not only India loses, but so many issues, you know, will be at stake. Particularly, the U.S. is the only one who's standing up against China. The only nation who stands up openly of Mr. Macron. But it remains to be seen whether he will put his words into action. but right side, because if he loses, let's not talk about him winning. If he loses, then we lose. We lose a lot. India loses a supporter, whatever his stupid statements from time to time, like the quality of air in India, or the fact that Khalid have been taxed too much in India. But if he loses, then democracy loses. And I would like to say that regardless of who has been president of the United States, whether it is Roosevelt, whether it is Eisenhower, whether it is Mr. Trump, the US has always been on the side of freedom and democracy when it was endangered. And today it is still true. And so for me, the U.S. is a symbol. Though I'm not, I'm more of a Frenchman. I feel more at home in France, and I feel in the U.S. I find the U.S. way of life doesn't suit me. But I'm an admirer of the U.S. and because it always came to the help of democracy when there was an danger, whether it was by Hitler, whether it is now by the Chinese, by Xi Jinping, whether it is by the Islamic threat which is all over the world now. The U.S. have been there, like a rampart, like a bulwark. So, of course, I wish that Mr. Trump wins, but I don't like so much the man.
Appreciate your views, Francois ji, and we'll talk about that. And Purnima ji, can you please go ahead?
Absolutely. I mean, if I was a woman, I would hate him more.
That makes my position a little bit at contrast at this point. Good morning, everybody. This is Purnima from Wisconsin. Thank you so much, Dhiren ji, for having me part of this discussion. It's my pleasure and my honor to be here. I'm going to talk from a perspective of two different ways because I'm a U.S. citizen at this point. My first goal, my first priority is U.S. in the United States. But I'm also somebody who is unable to disconnect from her roots. I'm an Indian-born American citizen, so I have to look for both the countries. Both are my mothers. So at this point, when I look at the connections between India and United States, there's tremendous amount of shared values, and the threats also from a contrast perspective, threats also are very similar, as we heard from Mr. Aajakia. China and Islamic terrorism is extremely going to be hurting both the countries. So from a perspective of democracy, whether it's the oldest or biggest, we still have a similar type of media engagement and etc. So I feel that US and India are natural partners. Now coming back from a Trump versus anybody else, I'm not going to go past as to what his past was and how many wives he has. Has nothing to do with running the country. As a leader, I look at certain characteristics of who should be leading, and based on what he has accomplished in very short time, 3.5 years, including what was happening from an impeachment perspective, what he went through in terms of defamation and etc. He has accomplished more than any of these recent presidents we had in United States. So I can't be more proud of his accomplished for the country itself. He loves this country and he also respects this country. So as a leader, I look at that kind of aspects. And if you don't respect and love the country, then what kind of leader can you be? First of all. Second of all, he's also God conscious. Now Biden, on contrast, they're all trying to remove the God from the whole narrative. And I'm not a Christian. This is a Christian country from a perspective that we are trying to talk about. But at the same time, I also like that at least he's a God conscious leader. So whether he's spiritual or not really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, he's trying to make sure that America does well and the people of America is self-sufficient, and the country is not got taken advantage again and again for the decades. So I think from that context, there is no better person than Trump. I will not be choosing anybody else. Biden is not even an option at this point. He should not be able to run because of his past. He was actually thrown out of races in the past because of his plagiarism and lies and deception and exaggeration of his academic record. So I think he's not even an option. He's just a pawn for Democratic Party. And today, based on what Trump has accomplished and his character for the country itself, there is no better leader than Trump. So that is my side of the story.
Thank you, all the panelists for your views, and let's get started with the question and answer and debate. So let's talk about, first of all, there is this issue of China. We did several discussions on coronavirus. We did also talk about the foreign policy implications of Chinese military and expansionism, kind of adventurism. So Trump has been strong and very tough against China. In the presidential debate, we have heard Biden talking about that he's going to take strong action against China. How do you see both playing out? Why is China? And China needs to be contained. We all, world over, everybody agrees that China needs to be contained. Who do you think, and starting with you, David, who do you think would be in containing China? David, can you hear us? I think he's frozen, looks like. So, Francois, would you like to go on that? Since you have covered China very extensively, being part of the continent, so you know it well.
Your voice is breaking sometimes. You're asking about Trump and China.
I'm asking about which president, which, if it is Biden versus Trump, who would be better off in terms of containing China?
Okay. Yeah, obviously, first one needs to have a perception of what China stands for. And not many people, not many world leaders have it. With the coronavirus, it should have become obvious that whether consciously China released it on the world or unconsciously or by accident, uh, from a spiritual point of view, there is behind the coronavirus, there are forces which are inimical to humanity. That it's not only the virus itself, because I think the media has, become very rational about the coronavirus and is using it to promote themselves, both the media and the allopathic doctors and the big pharmaceutical companies. But one should have a perception of what China stands for. And with the coronavirus, should have been easy. That with it comes not only the disease, but paranoia, fear, suspicion of the other. Fear is something that seems to have gripped the world, and we know that the Chinese use fear to intimidate the enemy. So if there's one man, one world leader who stood up and said, the Chinese virus, and questioned how it was released in the world and how, not only China but the World Health Organization hid the facts for so long, it was Mr. Trump. One has to give him the credit. It was not Mr. Macron. It was not Mr. Modi. It was Mr. Trump. So that requires some perception and some intuition. Now, the other factor is the guts, who had the guts to stand against the Chinese, not only because of the coronavirus, but because of their threatening attitude, because of their, thirst for hegemony, for conquering Hong Kong, for conquering Taiwan, for conquering territories in India. Again, the US was the only nation that, not the British, not the French, not the Germans, not the Russians even, because the Russians have their own interests. It was the United States who stood up, and so yes, China is a very, very important factor now. There is a war going on there's a war of words, there's an economic war. Of course, the economic war is the most important, and the Chinese seems to have, grounded up their machinery again and producing full steam as the pre-coronavirus standards. So that war is very important, and the U.S. is extremely important. Only the U.S. has the backbone, you see. The problem is that India is a great country. Yesterday we had a wonderful talk about, a possible Indo-Chinese war and what would happen. But you can't compare India to the U.S. in terms of backbone, military power, the capacity to, to stand in front of the adversary and, and face the adversary head on. Only the U.S. can do it. And obviously, Mr. Biden wins. I don't know what will be his attitude, but certainly not like Mr. Trump. So for me, as a journalist, as someone who lives in India and is aware acutely of the Chinese threat, not only to India, but to the entire world, to the entire world. The Chinese is a threat to the entire world. When I was a kid, when I was a child in France, there was a famous cartoon, a series of, cartoons which depicted the Chinese invasion of the world and of France, and actually it was quite prophetic, because though the Chinese may not invade the world with their armies, they have powerful nuclear weapons, they have a powerful army, but their economic might, it means they can conquer the world. They don't need any more weapons, they just need to conquer the world, and it happened, it's happening now. So yes, vis-a-vis China, vis-a-vis the Chinese factor, we need Mr. Trump, and we need the United States to stand firmly behind India. Again, the only country that has nominated the Tibetan representative, which for me is very important. Tibet is very important. This tiny nation is so important from a strategic point of view, because behind the Himalayas, it's a buffer between India and China. Yeah. All the great rivers of Asia are born into Tibet. So this tiny country is of such huge strategic importance, but nobody realizes it, starting with India. But the US has nominated a representative with the Tibetan people. The Chinese were very angry about it, but I applaud that. I applaud that. And again, Mr. Trump must be behind it, and we must praise him for that. So, but vis-a-vis China, Mr. Trump's re-election is very important.
Thank you so much. And David, actually, that question was to you, but you dropped off. So so the question. Did you hear the question, David?
No, I didn't actually. No,
okay.
I blame the Chinese. I think they probably interrupted my broadband.
So the question was, China has become a big factor in recent times. In fact, it has been for a long, but it was not recognized as much as world now recognizes. China is a big factor, and it is very important to contain China. I think world over people realize that it's very important to contain China. So which of the two presidential candidates are better suited to contain China?
Well, there's only one. I mean, in the first instance, Biden, I think Biden's son's a recipient of, was it 1.5 billion from the Chinese. I wonder, might that influence Joe? Listen, here's the reality in this one, Dhiren. We started this year with this global plague that emanated from China. And here we are now as we approach the final few months of 2020. And most of the global economies have suffered grievously, not to mention the loss of life all around the world, except one. Only one economy is showing growth as we finish 2020, and that is China. What a surprise. I never seen that one coming, did you? So China, in my view, and further to what Francois said there as well, I think China has almost won the global war. It's won it not by military, but cultural infiltration, economic infiltration and takeover. It's done it in so many different ways. The only guy that's standing against China is President Trump. And our hope lies in President Trump, because I believe if he gets re-elected, that's the thing that Chinese don't want to see. Now, if they get Biden in, then I don't want to sound negative, but I reckon if Biden gets in, and given the infiltration of the Democratic Party by the Chinese, then you're going to see a massive change in U.S. resistance, let's say, to China's. So what China does in the region with India, for example, I don't think Joe Biden's going to be worried too much about what happens there. He is simply, as was said earlier by Purnima, he's a pawn. He's a pawn. There are other people behind Biden. Trump's altogether different. So and I know we probably all share this, I do believe China is the single biggest threat in this world, full stop. And I think it's made massive progress, and it worries me enormously that if Trump doesn't get in, China will finish. China will become the global hegemony. It will become the global superpower. And all those people who complain about, oh, America imperialism, just wait till they get a taste of Chinese imperialism, which again Francois has talked about, happened in Tibet. You look at what the history of the Chinese Communist Party has been since 1949. This is a regime every bit as bad in its own way as the Nazi regime and the Stalinist regime, and it has to be confronted. And therefore, again, to repeat myself, I have to believe that President Trump gets re-elected because he will stand up. And again, to echo Francois, the US has got the military power, it's got the economic power, it's got the diplomatic power to actually then help countries like India, help other countries around the world who are like Africa, for example, which is being bought over by the Chinese. All those things only happen if Trump gets in. So Trump has to get in.
Thank you. And I think you brought a good point about, people complain world over about the US capitalism, imperialism, but they are not seeing the taste of Chinese, So I think if we were to compare, US is far better off for countries that complain about US being bullied. Anyways, coming back to, let's talk about continue on the China. The trade policy, and US has, or President Trump has brought China to the table to sign the trade, and only phase one of the trade was signed, trade agreement was signed. There is still, it's not complete, right? It's still, there is a work pending because it's just phase one has been signed. And even if you look at the data, the phase one, whatever were commitments, far behind. China is far behind in terms of increasing the imports of US goods. And that is also going to impact other countries, because once people see that China can be contained in trade, other countries will stand up against China. So what do you see from the trade perspective? Coming to you, Purnima, you are from the US, you are a US citizen, you have followed that very closely. What do you see from the trade perspective? If it was to be Biden next president, how do you see this China trade deal and other trade deals, including with Mexico, Canada, and of course NATO country? How would it go? And India, obviously. You are mute, Purnima ji.
Okay. We already know how Joe Biden has been super soft with China. He has been in the position of a vice president for 8 years already. We must acknowledge as to where we are as a country, completely dependent on China, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's a technological aspect. We as a country we are absolutely 100% dependent on China at this point. So China has the leverage. However, because of Trump's strength, he was able to strongly stand against the Chinese aggression. He understood what China is about to do. So, coming from a trade perspective, he did take a strong stand, which Democrats really didn't want. And as you see, over the last few months or so, since Joe Biden has come across as a candidate, he kept saying China is not a threat. He kept saying China is actually friend. So those kind of statements are really dangerous and scary for the country if you look at from a perspective of practicality. And we also know for real in China what they are doing from a labor perspective, and hiding situation, not paying child for their labors, and also using Uyghur Muslims for doing packaging and using them as a labor. And so, what we are seeing, as David mentioned, you haven't seen the Nazism or the Stalinist imperialistic, Chinese imperialistic design. So we,
Yeah,
from a
Marxism.
perspective, imagine, yeah. So I'm pretty sure, based on the deal that Hunter Biden did, $1.5 billion with Bank of China, plus the softness of Biden and his past experience, China is going to get it's going to be cricket ground for China in the United States if Biden comes. And I hope it doesn't happen. But if Trump comes, we know the trade war which China is going to be contained. And at the same time, India is going to benefit out of it because most of the businesses are going to move from China to India. Because India, as you know, you don't have to learn Mandarin or Hindi to do business. The people of India already speaking English. It's the largest country who speaks English, and we have youth who are extremely advanced in technology, and they're also they know how to pick up things and run the youth group. So India has a tremendous opportunity in this particular case. And if Biden comes, his softness is not only dangerous for United States, but it's dangerous for the manufacturing sector, but also for the people of America. If all the jobs starts moving to China, what is going to happen over here? As a US citizen, my first priority is US and citizens of this country who have been here, who have been born here, who have been naturalized here, who wants to make sure that United States do well. So my first focus is here because I'm Indian. I'm Indian born. I also look up for my Indian mother. So that's why I think Trump is the person who needs to come over here. Biden is a non-option.
Okay.
He's not a presidential material at all.
Thank you. Coming to you, Arif, how do you see this panning out? Right, you have also extensively covered China with respect to the corridor, China, Pakistan economic corridor, etc., and that use to actually do business in Africa almost kind of predatory manner. How do you see Biden coming to versus Trump? Who would be better off for the region in the trade sense and that China Pakistan corridor standpoint and one road one belt Europe standpoint?
I agree with all three speakers, especially with Francois, that maybe we don't like when Trump speaks. Sometimes he is very outspoken and he speaks some things which hurts many people. But still, when we have choice of Trump and Biden, there is no other choice than Trump then. Now coming to that economic corridor, CPEC was an imperialistic design of China, one belt, one road, acquiring of Gwadar port of Pakistan, thus coming to the very important trade route of Gulf and Europe, Suez Canal, all these. Then acquiring of Djibouti, Kenya's Mombasa, all these strategic ports. When did it happen? When Biden was vice president. You take out the period 2008 2016 when Biden was vice president, this thing happened. China imposed its imperialistic designs to the world, and American president was not strong enough to counter it. This is a very big issue that we have to see, that China with an imperialistic design had gone so far away. I will give you a small example that I was living in Belgium and doing business in garments. So I used to go to Paris garments market in 90s, and there were hardly any Chinese there. And then I stopped this business. Again, I started in 2008, and when I was going to Paris garments market, 2 out of 3 shops were Chinese owned. Entire commodity things, entire common man's use things are imported from China. And American President Obama and Vice President Biden could not contain the genie of China. And today, this coronavirus, the Chinese virus, it has some hypocrisy, it has some intrigues. You cannot say that it was a human mistake. It was imposed to the world. As David said, that the only economy that is growing, it is Chinese economy. Entire West markets are closed. People are closing their businesses. More frustration is killing people than Chinese virus. So all these are Chinese gifts. It did not happen overnight. The weak government of Democratic Party, Obama, Biden, allowed China to rule and dictate the terms internationally. This President Trump knows the root cause of problem, and he is ready to contain China because he is bold enough to call Chinese virus. He used to say that it is Chinese virus. You need guts to say this. Biden will not do this. Biden will not have power or courage to handle China. So there is only one choice, Trump.
Thank you. Coming to Francois, in your opening comment, you mentioned that especially as a woman, would be difficult to support President Trump. I mean, again, we are talking about global aspects, and this is an important aspect, right? But there have been many accusations against Biden as well. Media, as we know, and you are a journalist, so you know it very well, how some things are kind of, wrapped up, some things are kind of, wrapped under the cover. Do you think it is that Biden has done nothing wrong against women, or Trump, when he was not a politician and he, as we all know, talks many things without thinking? I mean, that's his weakness. So do you think it is really as an individual, looking at how media covers, looking at how Trump speaks, looking at how he was not a politician and never used politically correct words, even being a president, do you think it is more rhetoric and narrative that is kind of giving that impression about Trump being very anti-women as compared to Biden? Or is it more of a perception that gets built because of his personality, because of how he carries himself, because how media reports it?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you because that was your opening comment. That's why I'm asking you.
I'm a Frenchman, so some people do it openly, like the French. They see women and they whistle, and they can do worse than that. Or some people do it on the sly. So probably Mr. Biden does it on the sly, or maybe he represses his sexuality. And Mr. Trump, did it openly in a macho, in a kind of, in a kind of macho way, like the French do. So, no, I wouldn't judge Mr. Trump on that. I would. I don't think I would judge him on that. I wouldn't throw him the stone, like the Jews say, don't throw the stone because you yourself, could be guilty of it. So yeah, he seems like he seems like to have the old-fashioned, macho attitude towards women, but that doesn't make him a good or bad president. I don't think it's very relevant. My remark was actually just off the cuff like this. I don't think what makes him relevant. And I ask myself many times the question: is it because he goes out of the mold? He goes out of the politically correct mold that every world leader still uses. Is it because of that he's hated so much by the media, by the intellectuals, by a lot of people in the world, because he is not politically correct. He doesn't use the normal channel. He bypasses normal channel. Maybe that's why he's hated so much. Also, apart from women, apart of his machism towards women, is that he bypasses the political channels. And it is true that we see that the political channels are outdated now. That there are a lot of hypocrisy. There are a lot of we see the ambassador, for instance. I spent a lot of time with ambassadors, meeting them, whether the French ambassadors in India or whether the Indian ambassadors in France. That they're just glorified lackeys. They don't really have powers. They're just they look very polished. And they live in mansions, but they don't really. Neither do they have powers, nor do they seek to do something meaningful. So Mr. Trump, he's a power man and he bypasses. So, but the women factor is not relevant. I think it's not relevant at all. What's important is that why is he hated so much? Why is he hated so much?
Yeah, and the reason why I asked that question, and maybe David, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the reason that Trump is hated so much is because he's not a politician. That's why. He's this most unusual person. He first of all, he's a billionaire businessman. So unlike most politicians, he already had his money made. He doesn't need to be bribed. Unlike Biden, he's independent enough to do what he wants, and he says what he wants, Dhiren. And because he doesn't speak the language of the hypocrites of the political class, they despise him. Because he doesn't play the media game. The media, CNN and New York Times and all of them.
And your favorite BBC. And your favorite BBC.
And I listened to the BBC this morning. The BBC is in Trump derangement syndrome mode. They can't conceive the fact that the president may yet win again. And that's because he does the things that, everything we've talked about. Trump does what I think, like Purnima said, he does what's right for America. And what's wrong with that? I mean, like there's nothing wrong with Prime Minister Modi doing what's right for India, Boris Johnson what's doing right for the UK. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But America is so powerful. It's so powerful that what it does affects all of us. There's an old saying that if America sneezes, the rest of the world catches the cold. Well, if or maybe COVID as in 2020. And unfortunately, this is why I think Trump drives them all mad. And it's also, I might add, why I think others think he's so fantastic. Look, I agree. He's not, he's not necessarily a perfect human being, but which of us is? We've got all imperfections, So I think I've seen what he's gone through, Dhiren. I've seen 4 years of the smears against him, the impeachments against him, the false Russian narrative, all of that. And he stood strong. And I admire that so much because it takes so much strength when everyone's against you to hold your ground. And then he's, he entered the White House, the swamp, which he was elected to deal with. The swamp's still there. It's very hard to get rid of the swamp. So I look upon him as a guy with, so much strength and backbone and spirit. And he's actually embodies the American spirit for me. Yeah, he's not perfect, but he embodies the American spirit. Whereas Biden is an empty suit. He's China's man in the White House if he gets in, and everyone will know about that. India will know about it. The UK will know about it. The EU will know about it. Everyone will know about it when this lackey of foreign interests, should he get into the White House. So I love the fact that Trump annoys him. I mean, actually, for what it's worth, in my own small way, I do the same. And it's quite a pleasure to actually just say what you think. And you know something? I don't care if people like it. And Trump doesn't particularly care if people likes it. And yeah, that's there's a word for that. Leadership.
Thank you so much. And the reason my asking this question about Trump's attitude towards women, vice Biden, is I wanted to build upon that. When you look at the left-leaning people, left-leaning people generally talk about women empowerment. They talk about, gay rights, lesbian rights. They talk about open borders with immigration, right? So, what's your thought on left views with visor-wise world implications? And we all know that obviously, Biden is left-leaning, and Trump is obviously not. So overall, broadly talking about the left narratives and left ideology, if you will, to say that in terms of free trade, in terms of free border, in terms of the same-sex relationships, etc., in terms of tacitly supporting Islamic terrorism, keeping quiet on while talking about liberalism, keeping quiet on many of the highly repressive, regressive practices followed in Islam. Left is typically quite on that. So coming to that, I would start with, again, Purnima ji. Would you like to talk about what is your view of Biden versus on the left narratives and how relevant it is in the world context?
Okay, first of all, I want to set the record straight. Biden is not left leaning. He is the far leftist at this point. So we must understand where he comes from, whether it's a trade war with China, whether it is diminishing the ability of America's stature in the global stage, whether it is he raking the money for his own family. Um, these are all a vehicle to push his agenda. At the end of the day, what does he want? He has been sitting in a political position for 47 years in United States. And what was his accomplishment? Zero. But he did accomplish something, writing the crime bill for 1994, which Kamala Harris has imposed, right, and implemented. So, coming from that aspect, it doesn't matter what word he speaks. Today he will say something, tomorrow he changes his view on it. Whether you talk about fracking, that he said he was going to completely ban fracking, in the debate yesterday, he said that he's not going to ban fracking.
Yeah.
So, how are you going to believe this person? He does not say anything that he really believes in. He says something that in front of you today, it's going to change tomorrow. So, he is double faced already. And he doesn't have principle. He's an unprincipled man. He has been lying throughout his career to propagate his position. That's all he wants. So when it comes from a perspective of how do you want to define whether it's a women right, gay rights, it matters nothing for Biden. But at least for Trump, you know what you're getting. You know where he's standing. You know where his position is. That kind of person is not welcomed in politics, because politics is a dirty word. And that's why I used to say that I'm not a politician. I'm running because I care for the community. But at the end of the day, people forget what politics is for. If you're running for politics, it's actually for development of the community and the betterment of the people. That aspect goes away. But politics becomes dirty because of the politicians like Biden and Kamala Harris. We also know how Kamala Harris came to this position today, what she had to do in order to come here. So, as a woman, it
Yeah.
hurts me more when when somebody talks about Trump. We already know that she is a vice presidential nominee, and we are not allowed to talk about her own past and her career. How did she become and took her first political job? Why can't we talk about women's right then? Why can't we talk about terror reads of Joe Biden? Why can't we talk about the millions of people that the young girls today we found in Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden's laptop? So when we are talking about women's right, it falls flat when facts are presented. So right believes on facts. We are not against women's right. I'm a woman myself, but I still support Trump, not because whatever he said, but because what he has done. His action speaks louder than his words. Somebody recorded something in some private conversation, has no context, no meaning to the whole aspect of his running the country. Look at what he has done. He brought jobs back. He brought manufacturing jobs back. Mr. Obama has said that he needed one, a magic one. But did he has a magic wand? He certainly do have a magic wand, I suppose. So it doesn't matter what layer you put in terms of women's right or gay rights or lesbian rights. It's just a vehicle for them to push their agenda. At the end of the day, they are elites. At the end of the day, they are the one taking the private security that they're taking away from people like us, normal people. They're taking away our voices, our choices, but their voices and their choices matters. So to me, it's just a facade. Doesn't matter what you talk about. Look at the goals that they are trying to
Okay,
accomplish.
thanks. Thank you, Purnima. So you did say that that Biden is far left, not just left, far left. Building on the left ideology, and I would talk about expanding that. They also talk about human rights. They talk about immigration, open borders. Um, Arif, you are a human right defender. What are your views about the left view of the human rights, their actions on that, vice versa, what has been happening from the US perspective in the last 4 years? There are many human rights activists who are kind of criticizing Trump administration for being anti-human rights with respect to the how they have treated the immigrants at the border, how they have treated the children at the border, separation, children separation, etc. How would you talk about? What would you think about that?
Well, I think that Purnima has rightly, correctly said that Biden is not left, but he is extreme left. Now, this immigration issue is very serious issue. The teacher who was beheaded by a Muslim extremist in Paris, he welcomed refugees. The Swedish people, they welcomed refugees. Now you cannot keep a closed eye on immigration and you say that no, every person has human right to migrate. You have to watch out. America has all rights to watch out immigration because after all, you have to see who is coming to your country. Now, Sweden or Germany, they are regretting now that why they allowed those Syrian and Arab refugees to come in who have destroyed their society now. And common people in Sweden, Norway, Scandinavia, Germany, France. Now, what happened on Eiffel Tower when two Arab women were killed by common people in by France? Because you are trying intolerance. You are trying the tolerance of French people, of European people who welcomed us, who allowed us to enjoy our human rights in this country. Now, what are we returning? We are returning criminal activities. Why these immigrants are more criminal than the indigenous people? So, including America, every country has a right to keep a strong eye on immigration. Immigration is not just a simple human rights thing. Immigration has an implication on the society. Now, for example, there are some people like me. We live in coexistence, and we value these countries, England or France, where I belong to. We value the local cultural things, but most of the Muslims they don't value it. They want to impose their Sharia law. Now, if a Muslim tells to a British person that don't bring your dog to the garden, that's unacceptable. So we immigrants, if we come to these countries, we should not dictate our own way of life on these countries. If we are so proud of our own way of life, why are we coming here then? Why don't we stay in our own countries where we can enjoy all Sharia law or all our cultural values? Why are we coming? Because we did not like it there. So why are we are imposing here? So I think that President Trump is not curbing on or he's crushing immigrants, but he wants to filter it out so that Now, Indians are coming to America and they are contributing to American society positively. But what other immigrants are doing, that is wrong. So I think that it's not matter of left or right. It is matter of priority of the country. And I think that President Trump has been doing very well on this immigrant issue also.
Okay. Okay. Purnima, since you are based out of US, being a US citizen, talking about the immigration, child separation, DACA. There has been, DACA and the Dream Act and DACA, and now children or those who came as children are allowed to work, have pathway to at least green card, if not citizenship as of now. And Democratic Party has been supporting DACA for since Dream Act was brought in by Mr. Obama. Biden supported that obviously, and the Democratic Party is still supporting. Now, one thing that very few people even know about, let alone talking about, is that DACA has a provision which says that the child who gets benefit of DACA should have been brought illegally, undocumented. They don't call illegal, they call it undocumented, as if it is government mistake, they did not document them. So that's how the narratives are built, right? So they say that the children who are beneficiaries of DACA should be undocumented. There is an explicit provision in that. By that, the children that are illegally in the US, who came on the with their parents on work visa, who are yet struggling for the green card. There are some children who, after they pass 21 years age, have to actually get deported because they came legally. Had they come illegally, they could have continued under DACA. So, what are your views on this kind of distorted, uh, you know, human rights, child rights kind of policies that Democrats have, where they exclusively exclude or they exclude those who follow law, vice immigration law, but give benefits to those who violated the laws.
Let me start that with a very brief story. Earlier this year, when I was running for county executive role, I went to a event. It was run by Voces de la Frontera. These group actually is an activist group. They support illegal folks, no matter how they came in. When I went in there, they asked me if I was a supporter of open border and sanctuary city. I bluntly said no. I am a immigrant to this country. I came legally, processed all my paperwork legally, and waited for my turn. And I didn't skip line. I am for immigration, but I am for legal immigration. I'm not for open borders. I'm also not for sanctuary cities. So when they said that, they actually escorted me out of that event. And if you do Google on Purnima Voces de la Frontera, you will see a huge narratives in the media. And they talked about Purnima Nath was escorted out of the event. That's how they spinned the information. So now why I told you this? I told you this because there is a huge narrative that is getting built in United States. The country is United States of America. The first priority is supposed to be taking care of its own citizens, right?
Yes.
And people who come here legally. But what is happening? The Democratic Party, the left-leaning parties, and their stooges have come across and pushing narratives to take care of the illegals. You can't even say illegal. You have to tell them undocumented. And this was, and you are absolutely right, this was one of the narrative they pushed, that I said them that they were illegals. And they said I should not be saying that. There is no law in the United States where I can tell them, I have to tell them undocumented. So, unfortunately speaking, to answer your question, at this point, the Democrat Party is pushing a narrative of taking care of illegals under the banner of humanity and human rights. As Arif ji just said, It's not just about human rights. You can't just cross the border over here and expect the country to take care of you. This country at this point has $23 trillion deficit. Where how are we going to pay for it? And we have Black Lives Matter issues over here in the country. The We ourselves don't have the jobs that we need. So now coming back to the human rights and DACA and illegal and the legal citizens, the entire country. There are two countries in the whole world that is getting misused at this point, which is United States of America and India. There are tremendous amount of refugees comes illegally over here, and we cannot even talk about defending our own borders because we are democracies, because we are supposed to be looking at the human rights. So what happens to the people who actually came over here legally and the kids who came here and they don't have the visas? The entire immigration have to be, the laws have to be reformed. We have to look at this overall, trying to see exactly what we need to do. I don't have a solution to you, but the solution to take care of them when they come across the border and give the welfare is not a right solution, first of all.
God, thanks.
Second,
Sorry, go ahead. David wants to say
Yeah,
something, but before
yeah,
you go ahead, before you go, David, one thing. Before you go, David, one thing. Disclaimer: I am leading an initiative with a group that is talking about children who are legally in the US, immigrant children, to be included in the DACA with the premise that those who follow law cannot be at disadvantage. US believes in honoring and supporting those following law. So that's my position on that. So I need to give disclaimer. Yeah, go ahead, David.
I just wanted to add just a couple of quick points. First of all, the Democrats aren't remotely interested in human rights. They're interested in one thing: power. And if they can exercise power by bringing in millions of immigrants from wherever, they don't really care where, that's exactly what they're going to do. So that we need to be crystal clear in that. Biden said that he will, day one when he's been elected, he's going to give, what is it, Purnima, 9 million, or is it 14 million?
700%, that's what I've heard.
Yeah,
700%.
yeah, and the reason,
at least, yeah, somewhere in the range of 11 to 12 million.
yeah, and the reason for that is dead simple. Once those people get what he's promised, they will vote for him, and the Democrats stay in power forever. So it's really that simple. And to go back to what Arif said earlier as well, I also favor immigration, but it must be controlled. It must be structured. Look at what we've suffered in the UK. People like Arif who come and contribute to a country, or what any country which should want. But by the same token, because the UK has similar kind of problems to the US, if the Labour Party in the UK, they're like the Democrats in the state, they would basically import essentially the entire Muslim world if they could, because it would get them the votes that they need to get into power. And once they're in power, they stay in power. So the fundamental issue here is not to the left miscast immigration about human rights. It's not. They look upon immigration as about getting power in perpetuity, and that's why what the US faces, again, it's existential, this one, Dhiren. We need to understand this. If Biden gets in, and these millions of people get residency and then they're able to vote, game over. Forget about 2024. Forget about the United States, because you then got a Democrat at extreme left, as I think we agree, an extreme left Democrat party. It's never been more extreme than it is now. But they can stack the Supreme Court if they want. They can fundamentally dismantle the U.S. Constitution, and that's exactly what they're going to do. And so again, it's so important that people realize that this is a fundamental election that will determine the future of the United States and the world.
Thank you so much. I think, Francois, you want to say something if you want to, otherwise move to next question.
No, I would like to come back to the 4 consequences of Mr. Trump losing or winning the election. One is, Of course, China, we spoke a lot about China, that the US is the only country who dares to face squarely China. The second is Islamic terrorism, of course. Again, the US is the only one. And now, of course, Mr. Macron has joined. But only leader who says, that we need to fight Islamic terrorism, that it is a worldwide menace, threat, and that it's much wider than a few mad terrorists who blow up, decapitate people or blow up, buildings. It's a real war. I think
It's an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem.
Eventually China will join the West, the democratic world in that war, because China, of course, also has a problem with this Muslim separatists. So the biggest threat, to my mind, more than China even, though I'm an enemy of China, is Islamic terrorism. And again, the US is there. The US is the only nation who not only has the guts, but the power to counter Islamic terrorism, whether, it takes birth in Iraq or Iran, or, Iran is... I crossed Iran when I drove from Paris to Delhi many years ago. Iran is a very dangerous country, of course, because it believes in spreading by violence and money, the money they have, their brand of very strict and very rigid Islamism. So the second factor of Mr. Trump losing would be, that Islamic terrorism would have more of a free hand. The third factor is India, of course. India needs the support of the US. India is a natural ally of the US in Asia. It's not Japan, it's not the Philippines, it's not Vietnam, it is India, because India has the power, it's got the size, it's got, the manpower, it's got the military, it's got the nuclear power to face China. So Mr. Trump losing, India would lose not only a great friend, but also an immense support, which India needs in this very lone fight against China and Islamic terrorism. Let us not forget that when the America withdraws from Afghanistan, the Taliban and other, extremist groups will unleash their, force in Kashmir, against India, that we'll see again a series of bombings in India. So the third factor, if Mr. Trump is that India will lose a great friend and the support. And the fourth, of course, is immigration. Of course, I'm like everybody. I think immigration is great. I see in France, that some of the most talented people today, whether it is in music hall, whether it is in poetry, whether it is are Muslims, French Muslims. But at the same time, we know that immigration is a great danger to Europe, to Europe losing its identity, to this thing of Islam wanting to control the world, wanting to that the only true religion reigns upon the world. So four factors: China, Islamic terrorism, India, and immigration. For me, these are very important factors.
And these are some of these are intertwined.
Sorry.
Some of these are very intertwined. So coming to and we'll talk about those things, obviously. Coming to building on the left liberalism, right? And I will expand on that a little bit more. So we talked about immigration, we talked about their human rights issue, etc. We talk about terrorism right now, and Francois, you brought up, everybody touched upon terrorism. We talked about Islamic terrorism, but what we have seen in last 1 year, that has happened in US, maybe more last 6-7 months. If you look at how Antifa has grown, there is less of a Islamic there, but it is so. The point I'm bringing is that I would rather now expand that terrorism to more broader terrorism, extreme left terrorism, and maybe somewhere I start thinking that they are using Islamic terrorism or Islamic fundament or radicalism to somehow have a supporting arm so that they can have more wider, clutches. My thoughts, I may be wrong. So talking about the extreme left terrorism, which includes Islamic terrorism, because left is quite on that very often. We have seen and what we've seen with respect to Antifa. Coming to you, Arif, what are your thoughts in that aspect in terms of extreme left terrorism? And when we talk about extreme left terrorism, we should not forget what China did, right, about a century back with Mao and with Lenin and things like that. So, if you look at, there is some similarity with respect to extreme left communist-driven terrorism that we are seeing right now.
Well, as Francois mentioned clearly that these are the first four factors. There is a fifth factor also which we can add to the Islamic extremism. Now look, the beginning of Islamic extremism and Islamic terrorism was Arab-Jews conflict. And
Yeah.
who has solved it? The longest standing dispute, global dispute, is Arab Jews. And President Trump has done a wonderful thing by solving this longest standing dispute. So many Arab states are joining with Israel, recognizing Israel as a sovereign state, and they are building relationships like UAE and Sudan, and now Saudi Arab, Iraq, they are also lining up. So one
Bahrain also joined. Bahrain also, yeah.
and Saudi Arab and Iraq are two major countries. If they do it, you are almost solving an issue, longest standing dispute. Now, the dispute was between Arab and Jews, but who is playing with the dispute? Pakistan, Turkey, Malaysia, that they don't want to recognize Israel. But what do you have with Israel if Arabs are solving their issue with Israel? So President Trump's this thing, only in 3.5 years, he has delivered so many things. And like David mentioned, that he faced so many issues like impeachment, like women issue, like Russian involvement. Still, he has delivered. And most importantly, this coronavirus, this global pandemic, during all these things, he is building bridges and he is bringing peace. So, President Trump is very important to stop and kill Islamic extremism, Islamic terrorism, which is attached to far left also. Now, China, as Francois mentioned, that China had also a separatist movement. During my 90s period, when I was going to United Nations, China used to complain that Pakistan's Jamaat-e-Islami and ISI are training Xinjiang province extremists against China. So at that time, Pakistan was not an ally of China. So Pakistan was promoting Islamic extremism and jihadism in Xinjiang and Kashgar. And now what we see today is China is obliged to create concentration camps to keep Muslims there. But China is supporting jihadis of Pakistan. China
Yeah,
is
like
Islamic extremism in other countries for its own gains. So President Trump's victory is very important to fight this Islamic extremism, which is led by America because America is the major power of the world. But still, I would say that even after 9/11, America did not call it an Islamist terrorism. America still said that terrorism has no religion. Every country in the world is saying that terrorism has no religion. There is only one President Macron who has openly said that yes, this is Islamic terrorism. Everyone has to come clearly on the point. They have to point out when
Gus,
it is Islamic terrorism,
thanks.
don't be shy. Tell it that it is Islamic terrorism. Until you identify and you point out the root cause of the terrorism, you cannot solve it. Appeasement had enough now. I think that Democrats had appeasement at highest of level, and I think that it did not work out. We have to crush it. We have to crush ideologies that make differences between people anywhere. Even it is not good for Pakistan. I would say
Yeah.
that even for Muslims and Pakistan, Trump is important. If Trump wins, Pakistan can survive. If Democrats win, I'm sure Pakistan will dismember because Islamic extremism will grow globally then.
Thank you. David, coming to you, coming about, far left, extreme left terrorism. whether we call it terrorism, whether we call it radicalization, whether we call it activism, if somebody would like to call that word. What we have seen in the US recently, be it in Portland, be it in LA, be it in Chicago, be it in New York, be it in Seattle, there have been many riots coming from Black Lives Matter because of the unfortunate killing of George Floyd, which actually incidentally happened in the Democrat-ruled state of Minnesota, and the police actually, who killed actually reports to the state rather than federal. It's a state police, but somehow it has taken the turn as if it is the Republicans who have been against the black, who have created this kind of divide, but and maybe Antifa and others took opportunity to perpetuate this violence in so many cities. But this is also seen in Sweden. This is also maybe under different name. This is also seen in some parts of Europe and also UK during the election. There were many incidents that happened. May not be as much as riot, but if you look at it, the narratives, to look at the way it was presented, situation was presented. What are your views on the extreme left radical attitude?
Well, I think that, history teaches us that the left will use violence to achieve their ends. And what we've seen with, Black Lives Matter and Antifa, in my view, are domestic terrorist organizations. That's what they are. You've seen Portland, Minneapolis, right across the states, and all the blue Democrat cities. They've used violence to create an impression that America is kind of falling apart. And then they turn around and they blame Trump. These are Democrat cities. These are far left extremists. And what it demonstrates to me is that these extreme leftists, they're quite happy to use arson, to terrorize, even to kill. And we've seen Trump supporters killed by these extreme leftists. So in a strange way, this is where radical Islam meets the extreme left. They're both happy to use violence. They're not afraid to do it. And that's why we need a president in the States who stands against them. And in our respective countries, we need leaders who will also stand against them. But I also would just briefly say, Dhiren, for me, the whole fake news media reached its absolute zenith when we had, I think it was a CNN spokesman talking about a largely peaceful protest as the flames flickered behind him as an area went up in smoke. So the left are prepared to turn the media are prepared to turn a blind eye to the left, extreme left, and the extreme left, like radical Islam, is prepared to use any means to get what it wants, and we have to stand against it.
So coming to Purnima ji, you talking about Antifa riots, and it also happened in Wisconsin, in Madison, and one of the senator, Rick Perry, if I remember the name correctly, I think it was him or somebody else, I'm not sure at this stage, actually was kind of blaming or claiming rather that this is all peaceful riots, but he was himself hurt and beaten up actually in Madison. I think it happened about 2.5 months back in the riot. What do you see happening around in Chicago, where very not far from where you live, has been having this kind of shooting going on for a very long time? What do you see there? And again, I think we don't want to blame the Black Lives Matter. There have been racial discrimination in the US. We have to acknowledge that. But what we are talking about is whether the Black Lives Matters or the sufferings of black have been by those political and other interests, right? To basically further their cause. So that's what we are actually talking about.
So let me straighten a record here. First of all, when we say Black Lives Matter, the slogan itself is different from the agenda. The agenda is Marxist agenda. The founder, Patrice Cullors, She actually was found, and the tape was published. She was found saying that the whole idea, it's a Marxist organization. The whole idea is to oust Trump. If that is your goal, then what is the agenda and what is the slogan? So, as I said before, it doesn't matter what they're using, whether it's human rights, women rights, gay rights, BLM, Antifa, it doesn't matter. These are all means. At the end of the day, they want to oust Trump. Whatever they need to do, they will do. These are the means they are using. So I wrote an article a couple of months back about how Shaheen Bagh and BLM are same. Exact same principles were instilled in BLM, in Marxist movement, which was basically hijacked by Islamists as well. So now coming back to Antifa in Portland and Seattle and LA and even in
And
Kenosha.
1 minute, 1 minute, I stand corrected. The senator that was beaten riots in Carpenter. So I stand corrected.
Okay. So basically, what we are looking at here, as David rightfully said, that any means they will want to use in order to push their agenda. Antifa is a left-wing political movement, and they will use direct violent action to reform policies. That's what they're doing. And they say that they are autonomous group. They say that they don't have any leaders. But at the end of the day, when you see the actual BLM riots, where did they get bats? Where did they get supplies? Where did they get arsons? Where did they get Molotov bombs? So these are planned, organized activities that is getting carried away over here, and funding is coming from, I don't want to use the names, but I think it's very important for all of us to understand the big oligarchs like George Soros are involved in it. Even they were involved in Indian Shaheen Bagh. They're involved in BLM over here. They're involved in Antifa causes as well. So today you are looking at a conglomerate, whether it's Antifa, anti-fascist they say, but they're left-wing political movement. But at the end of the day, they're aligned with BLM ideology to oust Trump at the end of the day. All these riots are happening in democratic states and democratic cities. So unfortunately, at the end of the day, they blame Trump for what? We don't ask questions. At the same time, the media doesn't allow us to take those questions because they are also infiltrated. Whether it's a CNN's Jake Tapper or Don Lemon or Brian Stelter, they're all so engrossed with the hatred of Trump derangement syndrome that they don't see beyond it. All they want to see is Trump gone. What happens if Trump gone? Obviously, they'll get the free flow of whatever they would like to do. China already has them hold on them, and Biden already is a Chinese pawn. So it's a free fall of China. So what we're seeing is a
Thanks for this.
conglomerate, basically.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And Antifa, anti-fascist, somehow what I can't fathom is that they never talk about against, throwing out the regimes like Saudi Arabia, which is monarchy, no election, or China, which is one party, there is no election. They are not talking about against those, or Turkey, where there are hardly any elections. They are talking about throwing the democratically elected, presidents or prime ministers. So that's a little bit of, I see hypocrisy there, if I were to use that word. But we'll talk about Middle East, and Arif did bring about Israel and Arabian countries alliances, or normalization of relations. So, David, would you like to share your views on Middle East? What's happening in last 4 years, and how do you see this if it was Biden versus Trump who were to come to power?
Well, I think if Biden had have achieved this, he would have been on his second Nobel Peace Prize by now. But because it's President Trump, they don't want to talk about it. And Arif made a very good point that this whole problem that we've had for such a long time between the Arab world and the Jewish world, it has been seen to be one of the single biggest problems, and nobody made any real progress towards solving it. But look what President Trump done. For example, moving the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. Do you remember the horror? Oh, it's the end of the world. It wasn't the end of the world. I think and it'd be interesting to get other people's feedback in this. I kind of feel that the Arab world kind of respects strong leaders because they have strong leaders too. That's how they operate. So a strong leader like Trump, I think, has gained, whether they want to give it or not, but he's gained their respect. So the achievement with Israel has been amazing, and it's been completely ignored. During the US election, no talk about it. The media do not want to talk about it whatsoever. Had it been Obama, had it been Biden, we would never have heard anything else but it. So for me, this has demonstrated that President Trump has had massive achievements, and these massive achievements in terms of diplomacy, and this, because this is a diplomatic achievement, they all said he couldn't do it. He's achieved it. But then they won't talk about it, and they pretend it didn't happen. And that's part of the problem that we have. Again, a fake media that will not report the significant and substantive diplomatic achievements of the Trump administration.
Thank you. We have 10 more minutes. So we'll quickly talk about Indo-Pacific region. There has been a lot of focus on Indo-Pacific region thanks to, again, China's expansionism policies. So coming to France, why you are very, very focused on out of India, written extensively about it. Would you like to talk about the implication on Indo-Pacific region with respect to Trump versus Biden election coming to power?
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Would you like to share your views on what would be US policy towards Indo-Pacific region if Biden were to come to power or Trump were to continue?
One of the old British, sorry, David, one of the old British policies was to put Pakistan and India on the same footing, and it's been followed actually widely till I think that American presidents for a long time used to go first to India, then to Pakistan. So Mr. Clinton himself went to Pakistan after India. So one is a huge country, democratic country, and the other is a small country which has been, forgive me, Arif, but has been under dictators for a long time and has exported terrorism a lot. So there has to be a change of policy towards the what's called the subcontinent, the South Asia. Of course, if Mr. Biden wins, he may re-establish this policy of putting Pakistan on the same footing and funding Pakistan and military arming Pakistan to counterbalance India, because for some reason leftists have always seen India as a threat, a powerful India as a threat. This is why in America you see that most South Asian associations try to downgrade India by making a big hue and about South Asia. South Asia is so great, and but actually South Asia is India. If you see the influence that India has had on Sri Lanka and Pakistan, even whenever I went to Pakistan, I was surprised to see that except for religion, Pakistanis and Indians are more or less the same. I mean, Punjabi Pakistanis and Punjabi Indians speak the same language, have the same food, their marriages look the same. So Yes, Mr. Biden gets elected, it will be a catastrophe not only for India but for the South Asian continent. You know, this old policy to counter the Taliban, to arm Pakistan and fund Pakistan, has shown that it's a folly. It's an absolute folly.
Got it. Yeah.
Many of the weapons are turned towards India. So yes, that will
Thank
be a
you.
catastrophe.
Yeah. Thank you. Coming to, so in a recent election, other election that we see, I think the UK election was a very watershed moment. David, what were the projections? And I've seen that, but I would like you to talk about that. What were the projections of the UK election outcome by media like BBC and others, as compared to what we see? What was the outcome? Can you share with our viewers?
Yeah. I mean, the BB, the sorry, I just wanted to maybe give Francois an opportunity to speak if he has to go, but maybe he has to go.
I
Right.
think he has to go.
He's had to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, look, the UK media, just like in 2016, believe that it's going to be a Democrat win. They believed it was going to be a Hillary Clinton win. They believe it's going to be a Joe Biden win. I believe they were wrong then. They've been smarting about it. They've been salty for 4 years. They've been weeping and crying, and they can't get over it. They can't accept the fact the American people chose Donald Trump then. And I don't believe they can accept the fact that it's going to happen all again. So for me, it's going to be such a sweet moment when President Trump prevails, and the BBC will have to cry even harder, and they'll have to invent new conspiracy theories, just like they have spent the last 3 or 4 years. I think one of the problems, Dhiren, though, what saddens me is actually that here in the UK, and Arif, I mean, you can confirm this or not, but we're not provided with a balanced view of anything. I mean, I watched, there was for example, this morning, there was the kind of leading weekly political program on the BBC. They had Dr. Fauci on, and basically every question was, Dr. Fauci, would you agree that Trump is Hitler? That's basically what the questions was. It's pathetic stuff. The UK media will not provide balance on Democrats versus Republicans. They are 100% in favour of the Democrat Party, just like they're really in favour of the Labour Party in the UK.
So my question was related to the UK election that happened a few months back, 8 months back. What were the projections by the British media about the outcome of UK election before the result came out? What were they talking about it, and what we saw
it was the same. They were wrong. They were just before the election result happened in December, Dhiren. The UK media were gleeful that at last we were going to have a Jeremy Corbyn socialist government. Yeah, and Twitter proved it, because you only had to go onto British Twitter, and it was full of pro socialist tweets. It was wrong. They got it wrong then as well. The media are not journalists. They are activists, in my view. That's my big problem with them. They don't. Back in December, Dhiren, they wanted to believe that the British people would reject the Conservative Party. The British people gave the Conservative Party the biggest win since, I think, 1936, I think.
Victory. Absolutely something.
Huge victory. The media didn't see it coming. They didn't see the Trump win in 2016 coming. They didn't see Brexit coming. And the reason for that is all the same. The media are activists. The media are not impartial journalists. That's my fundamental problem with the British and indeed the American and indeed a big chunk of the world's media. They're partisan.
It's a world media.
World media, yeah.
Purnima ji, coming to you, and then we'll have a closing comment from each of you after we cover with Purnima ji. Trump talks about this silent majority, silent supporters. And I will tell you from some experiences, and I was talking to a college, in fact, coincidentally, he's based out of Madison in Wisconsin, one of my relative, going to college. And we were talking about 1.5 years back about this issue, and he told me that in the university, he was talking about one student in university who was sounding little pro-Trump, and he was completely bullied and boycotted, and nobody wanted to keep friendship with him. And we see that happening all over. You can openly say that I'm a Biden supporter, but if you say that you are a Trump supporter, you will be kind of looked upon in a way that humiliated way, or you'll be bullied, or you'll be kind of ridiculed. So do you believe there is a silent majority, or a silent support base for Trump, who don't want to talk about supporting Trump just because of this fear of being bullied, being ridiculed, being humiliated, being boycotted? At the end of the day, they would vote for Trump. Do you believe that would happen?
I certainly think so. There are we when we go around and see neighborhoods, there's a lot of Biden signs around in the yard, but you don't see any Trump signs at all. If at all, if you see Trump signs one day, the next day they're not there. People are just simply picking them up. So today I've seen people don't want to put car stickers. They don't want to put flags at all, or even they're afraid to keep United States flags in front of their house. So that kind of fear has propagated to to the communities, that even if you have a flag of United States, you might get attacked. But we exist. I remember putting up in Twitter one day saying that silent majority is not silent anymore, which includes me. I'm not silent anymore. 3 years ago, I went back to college. I went to do my master's degree, and I was one of the Trump supporter, of course, in a wonderful college and one of the top university in the globe. And obviously, most of them are leftist and by the Obama supporter, and I'm a Trump supporter speaking about defending Trump in the class, and people would look at me from left and right saying, "What is she talking about?" And then at the end of our 2 years course, there was a picture session, and one picture was just few of us, maybe 8 of us out of the entire class. Uh, we were just the special interest group. That's it. We were Trump supporters. Obviously, you could see that we would be looked down upon. Our pointers, our whatever debate information will bring out, it will be dismissed just because we are Trump supporters, just because we support his trade views or his immigration views and his views of securing the border and the country and etc. like that. And it's there, and I don't know why that is the case. I don't know if it is because of the labels of human rights that they play on very much, and they're successfully playing on it. And I think all of us, it's our duty and responsibility to debunk those, that these are means. They don't really care about gays, they don't really care about humans, they don't really care about people either. So yes, it exists. It has grown tremendously, and I believe that Trump is going to win, and Trump is going to win in a mega landslide. And it doesn't matter what media says, because they're lying constantly. They're trying to push narratives that it fits their pocketbook, including Twitter and Facebook and Google. So they will be shocked. We'll be voting Trump, and I've already voted for Trump, by the way.
Thank you so much. And then this is really sad that those who talk about freedom of expression cannot tolerate when somebody says that I agree with some of the policies of Trump. You may not agree with everything that Trump says, but if you have a point of view on some policies, why is that not a freedom of expression, or why that needs to be ridiculed, humiliated, even boycotted in colleges, where students can have lasting impact of that? So it's a very sad affair. But we will have a closing comment from all of you. So again, in alphabetical order, Arif, would you like to go ahead?
Well, it was a wonderful session, Mehtaji. And yes, I think that you are right in saying that freedom of expression is also conditional. And left, they don't believe on freedom of expression. They believe only when you support their cause. Otherwise, they stop you from speaking. And when we see this thing in Pakistan and third world countries, we don't get surprised. But when we see it in United States of America happening this is really surprising. I think that the voters, because it is not David or me or Francois who will be voting. The voters are Americans, although the implications are global. But voters are American, and I would, through your program, request to the American people to think thousands times before voting, because their vote matters, and it is their vote which will elect next president of United States, and United States dictates the terms internationally. So it is very important to bring President Trump who will achieve something for everyone, including Americans. But bringing Biden will bring destruction, nothing else.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, well, I would second what Arif just said. There's little doubt in my mind that the world sits on a precipice at this point in as we approach November the 3rd. And what happens in America is going to affect all of us wherever we live, Dhiren. It's going to have a momentous impact. Um, to my mind, it's a very, very simple choice, as I've explained earlier. It's between good and evil, and between hope and despair, between positivity and fear. And I believe that the American people, on balance, just like they did in 2016, will make the correct choice. And that will make such a difference to countries like UK, because I'm told that Boris Johnson is waiting to see what happens in the US election before he decides whether or not to do a final trade deal with the EU or not. It's going to impact on India. It's going to impact across the piece. So for all those reasons, I, as I say, want to go on record putting all my loyalty where it was in 2016. And despite his imperfections, and we all have imperfections, I believe that President Trump and the United States Republic will prevail.
And Purnima ji, your comment in that.
Absolutely, I totally agree with Arif ji and David ji. So, few things that's important for a leader of any country. For United States specifically speaking, I'm interested in economic growth, security, safety of the country, as well as the international affairs and foreign relations. There is no better person than Trump, as we established right here. Whether it's from a Chinese expansionism or from Islamic terrorism. Now, there's something that we usually talk about is terrorism has no religion. But at the end of the day, there are special interest groups who are forcing Hindu terror, Hindutva terror, RSS terror, and saffron terror. So when there is no religion in terrorism, then why are you then pushing our Hindutva as a terror religion, which is a false narrative they are trying to establish. At the same time, here in United States, the churches and synagogues are forced to close, but at the same time, during Ramzan time, New York Mayor Mr. De Blasio distributed 500,000 halal meals. So you can see where we are trying to go at this point. If Biden comes, God forbid, if that has to happen, I see that United States not only going to be under pressure from China, but Iran, but also from Pakistan lobbyists. And so Islamization is already happening in certain pockets of the country, like Michigan, Minneapolis, New York, and this is going to only expand. And countries like United States, which believes in freedom, liberty, and opportunity, it's going to be vanishing, disappearing. And at the global stage, countries like India, which is a democratic country, is going to be heavily impacted. So I would, through you, I would like to make sure that America, especially Indian Americans, Hindus, must vote for Mr. Trump as well as I would urge my Muslim brothers and sisters to vote for Trump as well, because it benefits in India if you are true Indian Muslim.
Thank you so much. And in the end, thank you everybody. I cannot vote. I'm not the US citizen. I'm living in US. I'm not the US citizen. I cannot vote, but I can give my voice and views. And I shared my voice and views through you. So thank you coming to the program. We wanted to cover a few more topics. We wanted to go into a little bit detail about democratic attitude towards India, CA, NRC, and Kashmir policy, where how they have been not so supportive or spoken against that. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but I think most people know about what their attitude have been. So we couldn't talk about that much, but because of shortage of time, we couldn't talk about a little bit. I wanted to also cover with respect to Russia, and what the hoax were made about Russia meddling into the election, but it is proven through the. If you got chance, just look at one of the Tommy, especially by Ted Cruz. It is very blatant how reading the email fabricated by FBI under Trump administration, Trump being president. FBI had courage to manipulate the email, and there is available on the YouTube just 7 minutes video about Ted Cruz testimony, or communist testimony by Ted Cruz. That FBI is so much infiltrated, and so the other Pentagon has been infiltrated. Many other institutions have been infiltrated, as we see in other countries. And we have seen this in UK, we have seen this in Europe, we have seen this in India, where institutions have been infiltrated by whoever they support, but against the Trump, against Modi, against Johnson, etc., etc., which is a very scary scenario. And that's why I urge the voters to look at things holistically. I urge the voters to go beyond rhetorics and emotions and look at the facts, look at the outcomes, look at the achievements, and then make your votes. Your votes can have global impact. So thank you, everyone. And we end this program with that. Thank you so much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Lovely
you,
to meet you.
everybody. Lovely
Take
meeting you.
care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much.
Arif ji.